Hi folks, welcome to our video. Today we are going to be talking about how bills become laws. So make sure that you have notes 3.3 in front of you. And our objectives for this particular note set is to one, explain the purpose of committees in the legislative branch, and two, give examples of the various checks and balances by each branch in the lawmaking process. So, this video, I'm going to give us a broad overview of Lawmaking 101. Um, and the first thing I want to start out by noting is that this is by no means a simple process, as you will see. This is a web. It's honestly like a maze to get to a law. It's very, very complex. So, the first thing to note is that a bill, whenever we're talking about a bill, we're talking about a proposed law. It's not a law yet. That will come later. So, a bill is simply really an idea. So, the first step in the lawmaking process is to have the bill introduced. And a bill begins with an idea. This can be an idea about something local or small or larger, like foreign policy, something that deals with the entire nation. For example, right now we've seen COVID relief bills being introduced into Congress to help those affected by the pandemic. So it really just begins with an idea. Now, bills can start in any chamber of Congress. So, what that means is a House of Representative member can introduce a bill, a senator can introduce a bill. Okay, it does not matter except for revenue bills. Revenue bills have to start in the House of Representatives. So, remember, revenue, when we're talking about revenue, we're talking about money, we're talking about taxes, any of those types of bills, which honestly I would kind of write off to the side, money, taxes, that must start in the House of Representatives. The reason why is that if you remember to the 17th Amendment, the House was originally the only part of Congress chosen directly by the people. Okay, so they wanted money to be closely related to the people. Now, once the bill is written and introduced, it's given a number and it's then sent to the appropriate chamber of Congress. So, if it's introduced by a senator, for example, it might be S 34 or 34. If it's introduced by a House of Representative, it would be HR 276, for example. So, that just kind of outlines where the bill goes. Now, remember, if it's a revenue bill, it has to start in the House of Representatives. So that is what we're going to pretend our bill is as we're walking through this process. So I'm going to have us start in the House of Representatives for step two. So once the bill is introduced and assigned a number, it then goes to the House of Representatives and it's assigned a committee. And this is basically a group, and we'll talk about this here in a second, but it's a group of representatives or senators, depending on where it starts, that meet to discuss the bill. It's a small group. Now, the committee is assigned by the Speaker of the House. So we've already talked about the leadership in Congress. That Speaker has a lot of power when it comes to assigning committees. Now, committees are so important because most of the work of Congress happens in committees. So, the purpose of committees is to discuss bills, investigate the impact of a potential bill, and really do the work of lawmaking. In fact, most bills will die in committees and never make it to a vote. That's how important this is. So this is where all of kind of the debate happens for the most part. And these committees allow Congress to specialize their focus to particular areas. So these committees often have topics that they focus on. For example, Ways and Means. Ways and Means is our tax committee in the House of Representatives. So that's going to focus only on tax bills. So that allows Congress to specialize. It also allows Congress to divide up the workload. Remember, in total, we have 535 members of Congress. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of bills to go through. So this helps divide up the workload. And it also helps Congress select the bills that will be introduced, edited, and it also cuts down the amount of bills for floor or voting consideration, right? It's making sure that the bills that are necessary and need to be voted on by the entirety of Congress are actually the ones that make it there versus the smaller, less thought out bills. Okay, so let's say that the committee debates the bill. And when they're doing that, they're going to talk about the pros and cons, why the bill should or should not be passed. Now, let's say that the bill dies. If the bill dies or does not get approved in committee, it is dead. It no longer can be voted on. Now, it can always be rewritten and reintroduced. However, that does not often happen. Now, if the committee debates and it's approved by the committee, it would then be sent to the full House of Representatives, right? Because we started in the House here. Now, the bill does have to wait in line for the bills before it to be discussed by the House. So there is sort of like a waiting line here. Now, members of the House, once it's being debated and voted on, members of the House may debate the bill and offer any changes or amendments to that bill. Something important to note, folks, is that any time that changes or amendments are made, the bill must return to the whole House of Representatives for a vote. So it's really a back and forth process. The committee will debate the bill. If it approves, it goes to the House. If the House wants to add an amendment, it goes back to the committee. Okay? Then the newly changed bill has to go back to the whole House of Representatives for a vote. Now, if the vote is favorable, once it gets the full House approval, it would then go to the Senate. Now, vice versa, if the bill starts in the Senate, it would then go to the House. So it has to go through both chambers of Congress. Now, if the vote is not favorable and the bill does not pass, the bill may have to start all over again back in committee, or it might die and just not be a thing at all. Okay, so let's say that our bill makes it through the full debate in the House of Representatives and it is passed. So what that means is it then has to go through the Senate now. And once it's in the Senate, the bill follows a similar process. There are just a couple of differences. Very similar to the House, it is sent to that appropriate committee to be discussed. So whatever the topic of the bill, it would go to that committee. If the committee approves the bill, it would then be sent to the full Senate for a vote. Very similar process there. Now, the Senate may also debate the bill and offer changes or amendments, just like in the House. But what's different about the Senate process is that filibusters can happen. Okay, filibusters, and I will show you guys an example of this in class. Remember, filibuster's purpose is to delay action or voting on a bill. The purpose is to delay that action. If there is no filibuster, the Senate would then vote on the bill. If the bill is defeated, it dies. And if it passes, or once it passes unchanged without amendments, it then goes to the president. Now, this is where things get, if you thought things were complicated, it gets even more complicated. If the Senate passes a different version than the House of Representatives, right, which is completely possible because the House voted on its bill. The Senate is now debating the same bill and offering its own changes and its own amendments. So if the Senate or the other part of Congress passes a different version than the House, the bill has to go through what's called a conference committee to work out the differences between the two chambers. And a conference committee really is dealing with compromises. They're trying to find compromises between the two different bills. Now, if that's passed in the conference committee, it has to go back through both chambers of Congress for a vote. Hopefully, you guys are seeing at this point that really nothing gets done without either the full chamber vote or until the bill goes through both chambers, right? So there's a lot of checks and balances that we'll see here. It has to be passed through both chambers, and it has to be the same bill that does as well. Now, if it is passed by both chambers, it then goes to the president's desk. Now, I want you to pause this video here in just a moment, and I want you to reflect prior to us talking about step 4. So in order to go to step 4, we just talked about how the same version of a bill must be approved by both chambers of Congress. Right? It always has to go through both before it can make it on the president's desk. So my question for you is, how does this represent the principle of checks and balances? Okay, so pause this video, respond on your note sheet, and then press play when you're ready to move on. Okay, so let's say that the bill has now been voted on in the House, it's made it to the Senate, the conference committee took a look at it, and it is passed through both chambers of Congress, and it's now on the president's desk. The president has 3 choices, really. They can sign, veto, or pocket veto the bill. Now, one thing to note, folks, is that the president cannot edit the bill and then sign it into law himself. Any editing has to be done in Congress. So that's important to note. I might star this piece on your notes. Now, one option is to sign the bill. If the president signs the bill, it becomes a law, and that's it. That's the end of the process. The president can then, or also, I should say, veto or reject the bill. So that's a check on the legislative branch. At this point, if the president vetoes the bill would then go back to Congress to be edited or amended, or Congress can override the veto with a 2/3 vote in both chambers. And if this happens, the bill becomes law. So Congress can then check the president as well. The president can also pocket veto a bill, and this means that they take no action on the bill, right? Kind of like they're stuffing it into their pocket to forget about it. And they wait for Congress to adjourn or dismiss for the session. And if they do that, just one thing to note is if they do that and Congress adjourns in 10 days, the bill does not become a law. Now, let's talk about the role of the Supreme Court in all of this, because this is a system of separation of powers and checks and balances, and the Supreme Court does play a role in lawmaking. Now, the Constitution gives the Supreme Court the power to check, if necessary, the actions of the president and Congress. One thing that it can do is say that the president's actions are not allowed by the Constitution. And in this specifically, with the bill to law process, they can tell Congress that a law that it passed violates the Constitution. So we've seen a lot of challenges over the years since Obamacare was put into place back with under President Obama, right? Does that violate, or do pieces of that violate the Constitution? And the Supreme Court is ruling on whether or not it does. And some pieces have actually been struck down as unconstitutional. If it is struck down as unconstitutional, it is no longer a law. All right. I know that that is a very complicated web of things, guys. I know. But ultimately, the purposes of our video today were: 1, explain the purpose of committees in the legislative branch, and 2, give examples of the various checks and balances by each branch in the lawmaking process. So go ahead and answer the questions in Edpuzzle. Raise your hand and let me know if you have any questions as you're watching, if I can explain anything a little bit more, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching.